Hello and welcome to another episode of DeHaan on Fire, brought to you by FireWise Learning Academy. I'm your host, Tim Davis. DeHaan on Fire is a podcast and YouTube channel featuring education, commentary, and conversation with world-renowned fire forensic scientist Dr. John DeHaan. If you have any questions for Dr. DeHaan, please email them to questions@dehaanonfire.com. Many times, Dr. DeHaan is being called upon to bring his expertise to a post-conviction investigation. I asked him how he's contacted for these investigations and what is unique about them. DeHaan on Fire contains discussion and video not suitable for all audiences. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. Dr. DeHaan, you've been called upon to take part in a number of post-conviction cases, probably the most famous, or at least most recent one, being the case of Stephen Avery in Manitowoc County, the Netflix series Making a Murderer. How is it that you get contacted to be a part of these investigations?
Well, I get involved by referrals usually, but from a variety of standpoints. Sometimes it's the attorneys that are involved, and they're familiar with my textbook, and they call wanting to talk to the person who wrote Kirk's. Because of the breadth of information there, and then when they see the resume and things like that, they realize 50 years I've covered a lot of ground, and a lot of kind of unique information bases and things like that. And sometimes it's another investigator that's involved, and they've heard me lecture or something like that, or they've seen some of my publications. The last one was one of the most recent ones, and I'm not directly involved in the investigation, but I got a call from a state fire marshal investigator, and they had a burned body case, and I thought, okay, I can see the train coming now. And I said, well, what do you have? Well, we had this individual all by himself in a remote trailer home, and living alone. And they found him sometime after the fire, and all that was left was a hole burned through the floor, a lot of bone fragments, and his head. And I said, oh, that's kind of interesting. And I said, why are you calling me? And she said, well, I called the FBI. And I thought, oh, who gave me up at the FBI? And I said, well, how'd you get my name? Well, Angie Christensen, the anthropologist there, told me I had to talk to you because you knew more about burned bodies than anybody else in the country. So here I am. So I'm doing a free consult on that, because it does turn out to be an accidental fire, almost certainly an accidental fire.
Now, it was a student of yours that put you in touch with the investigation team for Stephen Avery, correct?
I actually got a phone call from the attorney who's heading up the Avery post-conviction case, and she said, well, I've read your book and you got a lot of expertise in this area, but I did ask that question. I said, well, how did you get my name? And she said, well, our forensic anthropologist suggested that we had to talk to you. And I said, well, who do you have? And she named this very well respected individual from back east that I knew very well. And I said, well, I got the best guy. He edited a book on burned human remains. And she said, well, he's the one we had to talk to you because you knew more about burned bodies or burning bodies than he knows about recovering of burned remains, which, as an anthropologist, that was his specialty. And I thought, oh, okay. So, I got involved and discovered a lot of interesting things about the burns. And it turns out that the experience I've had over the past 10 or 12 years as part of a fire death investigation course, where I've actually observed the combustion of probably between 50 and 60 adult human cadavers under a variety of fire conditions. I have a lot of information, and I've published quite a bit of that in the professional literature. And so I've got a good body of data to look at the aftermath of a fire involving a body and have some interpretive skills or predictive skills about what was involved, what happened, how long it took, how big the fire would have been. There's a lot of mythology about fires and bodies, and at some other time we'll talk about the myth of spontaneous human combustion, and it's never spontaneous. There's always an external source, sometimes accidental, sometimes not. But I know what the heat release rate is of a burning adult body. Well, there are not too many people that have collected that data firsthand, and so as a result, I have a unique set of scientific data published, peer-reviewed, and everything. So that's how I get involved in these cases.
What, if anything, is unique about investigating post-conviction cases?
Well, the most unique thing is it isn't your scene. You're not part of the first responders, so you're dependent on how well the scene was documented and preserved, what physical evidence was collected, what still might exist, and sometimes weeks or months, even years after an incident. And so you're kind of at the mercy of how good the original investigation was. And there are times when there simply isn't enough good data to reach any kind of conclusions on. And that's really the big difference. Sometimes I do get scenes that are still, or cases that are still recent, but if it's a post-conviction case, it's usually years old and the scene is gone, except for there's one or two rare instances where a scene by intent, if not accident, has been largely preserved. But that's the worst thing, is being dependent on it. And that's my first question to the investigator: what have you got from the scene? And we got lots of pictures and we got measurements, and well, that's all good news. And we have laboratory analysis of X, Y, and Z, and so that's the judgment as to whether I can be of any assistance or not.
So part of the difference is you're investigating to see if the evidence points to the person who was convicted, not what does the evidence point to was caused the fire.
Well, no, you're actually looking at both, and looking at why did the investigator conclude or reach that conclusion that they expressed in court in the trial, and was it supported by the evidence that I see now? Did they get it wrong, or did they just miss something that was critical? And so it's really important to gather all the evidence that was presented and supplemented if there's new information present, like there is about some materials and things like that. Could X have been ignited by this other source, and we didn't think that was possible back then. Or in the Amor case, for instance, the reverse of that. The guy confessed to starting a fire on a pile of newspapers in a spill of vodka that we had put on he had spilled on the newspapers some time before. Well, no, that's physically impossible. You can't ignite a beverage in vodka with a match. Even under the best conditions, there simply isn't enough alcohol present in 80 proof material to support it, let alone on something that you spilled sometime previous. So that should have been a clanker right there for the investigator to say, well, no, it might be close to the alleged point of origin, but it's a physically impossible task. And so sometimes you get new sources of information that say, no, that's not going to happen. But you always test the individual's original hypothesis that he or she testified to, and then you look at everything and say, okay, what other possibilities are supported or are actually prevented by the information from the documentation. Just as an additional point on post-conviction relief, I was a member of the Texas State Fire Marshal's case review panel for, I think it was 3 or 4 years, and he raised a lot of questions, challenges, when he went to the Innocence Project of Texas and said, do you have any cases involving fires, on your to be looked at list? And he was criticized heavily by the public safety people for even considering, asking what the Innocence Project thought of some of these cases. And it turned out they were a really good group to work with. And when we would bring the investigators, or more importantly, the DAs that prosecuted some of these challenge cases, and they were just livid. Why are you challenging me? And you're part of law enforcement. You're not supposed to be doing this. And we'd sit down in a round table and say, this is what we're trying to do. Don't you agree? It would be better to check to make sure that this is correct. And by the time they left, almost all of them said, I'll go back and I'll find all the records I can in my jurisdiction and provide any help I can to make sure that that everybody gets the straight story. And that was really good, watching challenges from the Innocence Project turn into a positive outlook. And I credit the then State Fire Marshal for pursuing that, despite the criticism of some of his colleagues.
Thanks for watching another episode of DeHaan on Fire, brought to you by FireWise Learning Academy. If you have any questions for Dr. DeHaan, please email them to questions@DeHaanOnFire. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. Ring the bell to get notifications of new uploads to the channel, and don't forget to set your devices to receive those updates. For now, signing off for FireWise Learning Academy and DeHaan on Fire, I'm your host, Tim Davis. See you next time.